Imagination. I worked as a park ranger for a few years, mostly in a part of the forest far away from everything. We had an old cabin deep in the woods where we stayed during long shifts. It wasn't much, just one small room with a bed, a stove, and a little table. It always felt really alone out there, no phone signal, and the nearest road was miles away, but after a while I got used to it. It became my place to stay when I had to patrol deep into the forest. One evening, after a long day at work, I made the hike up to the cabin. The sun was going down and the shadows from the trees stretched long across the path. As I got closer to the cabin, I noticed something was off. The front door was a bit open. I knew for sure I'd closed it the last time I was there. I thought maybe the wind had blown it open. I walked in and checked everything. Nothing looked out of place, nothing was missing, and everything was where it should be. I closed the door and locked it behind me, trying not to overthink it. I sat down and made myself some coffee. After about an hour, it started getting dark. The woods outside got really quiet, that kind of silence where you feel like something might be nearby watching. I rolled out my sleeping bag on the bed and laid down. I was so tired from the day, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was like I wasn't really alone. I lay there listening closely. I couldn't hear anything except my own breathing. Just as I was about to drift off, I heard a noise. The floorboards creaked like someone was walking slowly across the room. I froze. My mind tried to tell me it was just the cabin settling, but the sound came again, louder, and this time it was closer. I sat up quickly, grabbed my flashlight, and shone it around the room. The light cut through the dark, but there was nothing there. The cabin was empty. I checked the door, still locked. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself it must have been an animal outside or just my tired mind playing tricks, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the sound came from inside of me. Heart was racing, but I forced myself to lie back down. Sleep wasn't coming anytime soon, though. A few hours went by before I finally passed out. When I woke up, the sun was just starting to come up, lighting the room with a faint glow. I felt a little embarrassed for being so scared last night. I stretched, packed up me stuff, and got ready to leave. That's when I saw them. Footprints, bare footprints in the dirt just outside the cabin. They weren't mine. I had been wearing boots. These prints circled the cabin, slowly moving around it like someone had been walking outside all night. Watching, my stomach dropped. I followed the tracks for a short distance, but they disappeared into the trees, swallowed by the forest. I stood there for a long time, staring into the woods, trying to make sense of it. Someone had been out there walking around while I was inside listening to me, watching me, and they had been close enough that I could hear them moving. I never saw anyone, never figured out who or what left those prints, but I couldn't shake the thought of how close they'd been, how long they'd been out there circling the cabin. After that, I never stayed there again, but that's not the worst part. A few months later, a hiker went missing not far from that area. The search teams found his tent, his clothes, even his boots, but no sign of him. His bare footprints led off into the woods, and then just like before, they disappeared. I went to the cabin with my wife and her mom for the weekend. I didn't really want to go, but it was something my wife thought we should do together. The cabin was deep in the woods, far from any main road. It felt cut off from everything the way cabins usually do, but I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was peaceful, just trees and the sound of wind every now and then. We had packed plenty of food, so we didn't need to leave for anything. The first night was pretty normal, though the air was cool and the woods were quiet except for the usual sounds, branches swaying and maybe a stick breaking somewhere far off. I slept, but not well. The old cabin creaked all night, and it made me feel uneasy. The next day was nothing special either. We ate, took a walk in the woods, and sat on the porch. My mother-in-law didn't say much, but she kept looking at me. I could feel her watching me every time I moved. First, I didn't think anything of it. We've never really been close, but this felt different. Her eyes stayed on me for too long, and the silence between us felt heavy. The second night, I started feeling weird about things. I kept hearing noises outside. At first, I thought it was an animal moving around in the trees, but the longer I listened, the more I realized it sounded like footsteps, slow, steady footsteps. I didn't want to wake anyone, so I just laid there listening. Then the footsteps stopped right by the window. I didn't move. I tried to tell myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Nothing happened after that, and eventually I fell back to sleep. The next morning, I went outside and saw something strange. There were deep marks in the dirt by the side of the cabin, like something heavy had been dragged through it. I walked around the whole cabin and saw the same kind of marks all the way around. It was unsettling. I didn't tell my wife or her mom about it because I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to think myself. That evening, things felt even worse. The air inside the cabin felt heavy, almost thick. And the forest outside was strangely quiet. Usually there'd be birds or something, but not that night. It was dead silent. I stayed close to the cabin, not wanting to go too far. That's when I saw her, my mother-in-law, standing just at the edge of the trees looking straight at me. She hadn't said a word all day, but the way she stood there just staring made me skin crawl. It wasn't like she was just looking at me, it was like she was waiting for something. I went inside and locked the door behind me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I peeked out the window and she was still standing there, not moving at all. I didn't know what to do. I told myself it didn't mean anything, but I couldn't stop the growing tension inside me. Hours went by and she finally came inside. I tried to act normal, but the night was worse than before. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of heavy breathing. It wasn't mine and it wasn't my wife's. It was coming from outside near the bedroom window. I didn't look. I just stayed as still as I could, trapped in my bed, waiting for it to stop. When it finally did, I was too scared to fall back asleep. The next morning, I went outside again. The marks around the cabin were even deeper, like something had been dragging itself around the cabin all night. And once again, my mother-in-law was staring at me like she knew something I didn't. The air in the cabin felt suffocating and it wanted to leave, but I didn't have a good reason. I knew it would sound crazy if I said anything. That night I stayed awake. I sat by the window waiting to hear the sounds again, and just like before they came, slow, heavy footsteps moving around the cabin, but this time I heard something else too, something being dragged through the dirt. It was slow, and it sounded wet, like something heavy being pulled along the ground. I froze, my heart racing. The sounds moved around the cabin, coming closer and closer, and until they stopped right outside the window. I didn't want to look, but I had to. I forced myself to peek through the curtain. There was nothing there, just the trees swaying a little in the wind, but the ground outside the window was all messed up, like something had been standing there watching me. By morning, I was ready to leave. I didn't care if I didn't have a reason, I just wanted to go. I went to find my wife, but she wasn't in the cabin, neither was her mother. The whole cabin was silent, and I started to panic. I looked everywhere, inside and out, but they were gone. There was no sign of them except for those deep drag marks in the dirt leading into the woods. I didn't follow them. Something inside me told me not to. I knew if I went into those woods, I wouldn't come back. The way her mother had stared at me, the way she waited like she was planning something, and now they were both gone. I left the cabin that day alone, and I haven't seen my wife or her mother since. I never told anyone what happened. I'm not sure anyone would believe me anyway, but every now and then I hear those slow, steady footsteps. I hear something being dragged through the dirt, heavy and wet, and every time I know it's getting closer. I hadn't seen my ex-wife in years, so when she called out of nowhere, it caught me by surprise. She sounded different, calm, almost like she missed the past. She said she wanted to meet up to talk about everything that happened between us and suggested we go somewhere private. She told me about a cabin she had rented out in the middle of the woods, just the two of us, no one else around. It felt like a strange idea, but I was curious and still had some feelings left, so I agreed. When I got to the cabin, it looked peaceful and quiet. It was small and made of old wood with trees all around that blocked most of the sky. I got out of the car, the cold air hitting me, and walked toward the cabin. It felt cut off from the world, old, far away from everything and everyone inside. It was simple but cozy, with a fire already burning in the stone fireplace. She must have been there for a while setting things up. I put my bag down, feeling a bit uneasy, but I tried to ignore it. The night started off fine. We talked about old times, things that used to make us laugh, but as the evening went and something felt off. It wasn't just the weirdness of being around. Found her again after so long. It felt like something heavy or something unsaid hanging in the air. Time moved slow, and I noticed how the trees outside seemed to press closer to the cabin. As the sun went down, darkness came fast in the woods. The wind outside started to pick up, making a low, creepy sound as it moved through the trees. Inside, the fire was the only light. I tried to relax, but I couldn't. Something felt wrong. I didn't know if it was being with her again after everything that happened, or if it was this cabin. It didn't feel right. I sat there staring into the flames, trying to figure out why I was so tense. I looked over at her, and she was sitting on the edge of her chair staring at me. Here was something in her face, something cold and distant, not like the person I used to know. She stood up and walked over to the window, staring out into the dark forest. The silence in the room stretched on too long. I felt my anxiety grow, but it stuck to me like I couldn't shake it off. I stood up thinking about leaving, but something made me stop. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe I just wanted to know why she brought me here. She turned around slowly, and for a second I saw it, the look, the same cold, empty look she had before we split up, like she wasn't really there, like her mind was somewhere else, watching, waiting. I suddenly felt like I had made a huge mistake by coming here. The wind Outside was getting louder, and the fire was almost out. I looked around, feeling the walls closing and the shadows stretched longer, and the room felt smaller. My heart started to pound. I grabbed my bag and went for the door, but before I could get there, I felt her hand grab my arm. She didn't say anything, just stood there gripping my wrist hard, too hard. I pulled free and ran to my car, leaving her standing by the door. I didn't look back. I jumped in, started the engine, and sped down the dirt road, my hands shaking on the wheel. I couldn't explain what had just happened, but I knew something wasn't right. I've thought about it over and over, but I still can't shake the feeling I had back there. That look she gave me, like she had planned all of this, like she knew exactly what she was doing. I don't know if she wanted to hurt me or if it was just my mind playing tricks, but one thing is clear: I'll never go back to that cabin. I can't, because as I was driving away, just before the cabin disappeared in the rear view mirror, I swear I saw her standing at the edge of the trees, watching me, and she wasn't alone. There was someone else, someone taller, standing right behind her in the dark, too far to make out clearly, but close enough to see it wasn't my. To begin, the larger one of the two of my China dolls is what I got when I think I was 11 or 12. My best friend Kay at the time gave it to me for my birthday. My grandmother told me that China dolls like that are not very cheap. They're meant more for decoration, not play. Granted, I didn't have many toys and stuffed animals. I never was interested in them that much. I had some, sure, but I could possibly count them on two hands. Most of them I gave away to kids in the family when I turned 13. The smaller of the two I got when I was a little older. I think it was an Easter gift. My sisters got one too, but I believe they lost theirs. I've had these dolls for at least 9 years now. I'm 22 as writing this. During those years, I've got a few short stories involving them, some recent, some a little older. The first story involves when I lived at the old log cabin house. We'd been there for about 2 or 3 years then. This was when my sisters first moved in. It was also around the time they began to say the doll unnerved them. Granted, at the time I had had that doll for a couple of years. Never once had I felt anything off about it. My more spiritual friend says they might like me. However, upon seeing my dolls, my sisters always requested me to push the hat down on the larger one, as that was the one I kept in my bedroom on the dresser near my bed. This would cover its eyes so it didn't have to look at you, though once or twice I do remember that I'd find days when the hat would be lifted even though I hadn't touched the doll. For context, for those who don't own China dolls, they're mostly for show and not play. The only thing one would find off physically wrong with the large doll are the fact its eyelashes fell off due to wear and tear. That's about it. Maybe its hair is a little off as it tends to fall out when I try to get the tangles out of it. Next story is for my little sister. At the time this happened, I was away in Florida for the summer. I was spending time with some aunts there. Now my sisters and I shared one large room in the cabin house. It could fit 3 full-size beds and still have room for a futon TV and even 3 dressers, so yeah, it was pretty big. But back on track, my sister was coming up the stairs to get something from the room. She suddenly noticed the doll. Before I'd left, they had specifically asked me to turn the doll to face my bed with the hat down, something I definitely did, mostly out of amusement, as I thought it was funny. They were so afraid of it. Me other sister, the middle one, swears up and down that before this she even put the doll on my bed under the covers. In fact, I remember finding it being there when I got back for the school semester. But as she climbed the stairs, she turned her head to see into the room from the banister, which had a clear view of my bed and the dresser there. Sitting on the dresser, hat up and facing her, was the doll. My sister, needless to say, didn't get what she needed and instead bolted straight down the stairs. She didn't come up until later, making sure to bring my middle sister with her. They then put the doll back under the covers of my bed before going back down the stairs. The next incident took place about 1 or 2 years ago in the new house. I was away at college at the time. One morning, my grandmother woke up to hear knocking sounds from my room. She said it sounded like someone taking their fist and banging on wood. Oddly enough, at the time I would sit my dolls on a wooden bookshelf near the door, and there's a wooden box near that. Also, my grandmother thought it was coming from my mini fridge, but once she got to the room, the sound stopped. This would happen on 2 more occasions before I got home. When I got back, she asked me to check on it. I looked around my room, finding the fridge was running smoothly, no leaks or anything inside that can make such a sound. After that, I went to relax for a bit. At some point, she said she heard it again, but from the time it took me to walk from the den to the living room, which is under a minute, it all stopped again. I never got to hear it. My grandmother refuses to say that it saw spirit. The last event is small, but a family friend wanted a picture of the doll. Because of the things my sisters had said about it, that it was possibly haunted or possessed, she snuck into my room without me knowing, lifted the hat, and took a picture. She swears up and down the eyes flicked over the doll at the time was staring at her from my desk in the corner. She took the picture and got the heck out of there. I guess my dolls don't like people snooping in my room just as much as Iden. My grandmother is also known to snoop as well. I still have the dolls. In fact, not too long ago, as of writing this, there was a loud noise from that direction behind me. On occasion, I swear I see the smaller one's eyes looking at me, but I don't get a malicious intent from them. Maybe they know I am typing about them, but luckily they do seem to like me, and I hope it stays that way. Maybe as long as I take care of them, they don't seem bothered by Mefter. All they say, you should never break a china doll lest the spirit inside might take it out on you. Laughs. I've always been enthralled with the macabre. The darker, the better, as far as entertainment choices are concerned. That being said, I have never witnessed or been a part of any type of paranormal encounter that would change the year I turned 25. I was at a college football camp. My brother was on the team. He, along with myself, my boyfriend, and our oldest brother and a few friends, were all in a cabin together. We had rented it near the summer training camp. It was in a lush and woodsy area a few hours away from Phoenix. We wanted to escape the torturous, brutal desert sun for the week. My younger brother had told me some intense stories about him and a few of his friends, and what unfolded after a few sessions they had on a Ouija board. My little brother is one of the most level-headed, honest, and rational people I've ever known. I was fascinated by his tales of this experience. So when we were all hanging out at that cabin one night after the team was done for the day, someone suggested we try a Ouija board. We didn't have one, so I took it upon myself to literally make one out of a piece of cardboard. The planchette was also something I hastily and essentially generically fastened out of cardboard. My little brother was down to watch, but he was adamant about not wishing to participate, so it would be me, my ex, his best friend, and my oldest brother who started to move the planchette around. And long story short, after a while it really started to go, and by go I mean it was moving around in no particular order or design, but it was definitely moving. My ex's friend was annoyingly skeptical, kept doubting why it was moving, as if one of us was faking it. However, we all hardly had the faintest of one fingertip on the board and asked this thing hauled quickly around the janky bent piece of cardboard I crafted. It was so clearly being moved at times my jaw would be on the floor and my boyfriend would have to remind me to keep a fingertip on the planchette. You all began to ask questions one at a time, and when my ex's friend's turn came up, since he was the most skeptical, I told him to ask only something that he would know. He asked the name of his childhood dog when he was around 5, about 20 years before I met this dude. It spelled out the unique name of that pet. I asked it the name of the one brother who wasn't with us was, and that was accurate too, though it was an easy question. So I said, okay, what is the name of our soon-to-be sister-in-law that brother is marrying? It spelled out her name too, though it wasn't exactly perfect. It was a common name with a common spelling. I was like, sure, close enough, but the planchette moved to no, and then it went through and spelled her name correctly this time. We continue to ask questions, getting lots of specifics, and after a few hours we ended up just giving up and going to bed. I remember feeling so shocked that it worked. I looked at my little brother, who had this intense expression on his face, asked, well, what did you expect? Fair enough, I thought, but I literally did not expect it to so blatantly work. But I do wish I knew one thing, how to properly say goodbye and end the session, because ever since then I feel there's some dark energy, something that we let in that night which affected my life in particular. I suppose if there is a moral to the story, it would be not to play with something when you don't know the rules. There could be unforeseen consequences that are not worth it in the end. I had just settled into my cabin for the weekend, a small retreat in the woods. It was a cozy place, far from any noise, with nothing but the rustling leaves and the occasional chirp of crickets breaking the silence. The cabin was in a secluded spot, but there was another cabin about 100 yards away, barely visible through the trees. I hadn't seen anyone around since I got there, so I figured my neighbors must be away that evening. I noticed something odd. The cabin next door had its lights on, even though no car was parked outside. The lights flickered on and off, which made me feel uneasy. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just a problem with their generator or a power issue. Around midnight, I heard a loud bang coming from the direction of the neighboring cabin. I jumped out of bed, straining to hear over the creaks of the old wooden floors. The sound was followed by what sounded like footsteps on the porch. I thought it was probably just an animal, but the noise was too steady, too rhythmic. I decided to check it out. Grabbing a flashlight and a heavy stick for protection, stepping outside, I moved cautiously toward the neighboring cabin. The night air was cool, and every rustline in the underbrush made me flinch. As I got closer, I saw the flickering lights were now steady. The windows, usually dark, were glowing warmly. I sneaked up to the cabin, shining my flashlight through a crack in the curtains. What I saw made my heart race. The inside of the cabin was a mess. Furniture overturned, drawers pulled out, and personal items scattered everywhere. It looked like there had been a violent struggle. Suddenly I heard a soft shuffling sound behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing there. My flashlight beam moved over the surrounding trees, but I saw only shadows. I went back to the cabin and noticed the front door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open with the stick, trying not to make any noise. Inside the cabin was eerily quiet. I scanned the room with my flashlight. The scene was even worse than I thought it was. Clear, someone had been living there recently, and not in a normal way. Old food containers were scattered around, and there was a strong smell of mildew mixed with something I couldn't quite identify. I heard a noise from the back room and froze. It sounded like something or someone shuffling around. I took a deep breath and slowly approached the source of the noise. Peeking around the corner, I saw an old man huddled in a corner, looking disheveled and frightened. He looked up at me, his eyes wide. It was clear he had been hiding here, and from the state of the cabin, he had been living in fear. I realized he was likely the cause of the disturbance and had been squatting in the cabin, probably running from something or someone else. I slowly backed away, not wanting to provoke him. Once outside, I called the police. They arrived quickly, and after they investigated, they confirmed the man was wanted for questioning related to several thefts in the area. They took him away, and I was left with the unsettling realization of how close I had come to danger. The police made sure the cabin was secured, and I spent the rest of my weekend on edge. The flickering lights had been a desperate attempt to signal for help, but it was too late. As I packed up to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the trees, something that was never quite visible, but always there. The quiet woods now felt menacing, and I knew that sometimes the most peaceful places can hide the most disturbing secrets. I left with a shiver, wondering what would have happened if I hadn't looked next. In 2020, we all know there were some global mishaps, and an event affected my graduation that year, which was a bummer. It affected our high school seniors the most. It seemed there were people who had to take online classes and didn't participate, so they didn't graduate. I felt really bad after all that happened. It was nearly Halloween of 2020. It thought to myself, it'd be pretty cool if we all got together and had a lot of fun to make up for the awful year. So I thought of an idea to have a party. I knew it was against regulations on the social distancing stuff, but honestly, I didn't care anymore now. I didn't want to have a party in Meow House, because the last time we had a party there, we had problems with some of our stuff being missing or stolen, but the problem was I didn't know where to go, so I opened up to my girlfriend, Leanne, including my friends on Discord, asking them all some suggestions to a few places. One of Leanne's friends, Sam, said, "Why don't we try that cabin or outdoor home that your third cousin has?" I asked Sam why she even wanted to go. She said she was off work. It was Halloween. It would be a blue moon on a Saturday. A lot of good points. All right, I said, so I gave everybody the address and where the party would be. Now, another thing to note, my third cousin Lance moved to California for his new job as a high school music teacher, so I asked his husband Francis if I could throw a party at their cabin. He answered, "Sure, as long as you guys don't drink alcohol." Now, I don't keep any promises, so on Halloween I grabbed snacks, soft drinks, and my costume and headed out to the cabin. I was the first to arrive there. I quickly put on my costume. In case you're wondering what I wore, it was a steampunk plague doctor fitting. Right after a few minutes go by, my friend Cameron arrived with one of those glowing purge masks, which also makes sense as well, and due to the lovely riots, peaceful protests that were going on at the time, he brought over some Angry Orchards and a variety of flavors. Then Leon arrived dressed as Little Riding Hood. Sam arrived after that as an anime cat girl. Yeah, I know it's weird. Finally, another friend of mine, Adam, arrived as a Call of Duty Zombies character. I think it was Dr. Edward Richtofen. After my friends arrived, we partied, drank, and played some games, then we watched some of these Saw movies. Altogether, having a good time. Now, something you should know is that experienced something of a cryptid sighting here before. I truly believe at one point that I saw a werewolf at this cabin. You may have heard the story before. Narrator's note: if you want to hear the original story, it was featured in the episode titled 4 Horrifying Creatures Hunting People in the Woods, which was episode 278 of the Unexplained Encounters podcast. Now back to the story. Music. I had shared this story with this group of friends, and Sam especially was inquisitive of it. At this point in the night, Sam kept demanding that we go outside into the woods to find this elusive werewolf, having been terrified of the creature before. I thought this was a terrible idea, so I replied to her, "You know what, if you want to go out in the woods in the dark all by yourself, then be my guest. If you get attacked or even killed by that thing out there, I'm not coming to rescue you." I said this not to be mean, just to scare her into thinking It would be a bad idea, but I was wrong because it backfired. Sam immediately headed towards the door and left not a very big brain move of me. Leanne noticed that Sam headed out on her own and demanded we should try to find her before it was too late. If she wasn't going to be attacked by or wolf, she might be attacked by a bear or coyotes. She could get lost with the sigh. I agreed. Adam wanted to stay in the cabin because he was a bit afraid of the stories I've told. He was also scared of the typical wildlife out there. I can understand. Thought as silly as this may sound, the three of us grabbed our flashlights. We went out into the woods with our costumes on looking for a friend. All the while there might be some sort of monster on the loose. It might sound silly, but I can assure you this legitimately happened. Stupid, yeah, we can agree on that. We were walking along the wooded road and it wasn't long before I noticed that something was wrong. I turned to my right and didn't see anything weird, but I swear I heard something. Then it clicked. The noise, the position it came from, it was the exact same as 2 years ago. The only way to prove this was to do exactly as I did before. I told the guys to stop walking, and just as I predicted, the noises nearby stopped too. We're being followed. I whispered to them, "Do you have any weapons?" Cameron replied, "Yeah, I've got a pocket knife." "Will that work?" "Are you kidding me?" "No." "Well, I wasn't expecting to be stalked." Suddenly, we heard someone running behind us. We turned around, horrified, only to see Sam petrified. Leanne immediately exclaimed, "Sam, thank goodness you're okay." Sam replied right away, "No, I'm not okay." "Do I look okay?" "What happened?" she answered as I looked around, making sure the coast was clear. "Just went out to walk, wondering if I could see the same thing that Javier saw. He heard something behind me, and sorry, you were right." I looked over to Sam, then confused. "So you saw it?" Nodded rapidly. "Yes, huge tail, snout, everything." As soon as she said that, my heart dropped. If she hadn't been the one making the noises near us, then what weighs it? I looked down the road and I saw it, the same creature that I stared down 2 years ago. We were reunited face to face, only this time it was nearly 5 or 6 feet away. "Holy crap, what?" Lee and asked. Ben looked over and saw what I was seeing. She was speechless. Then, before long, we all saw the creature before us made a loud growl. Then we began to hear branches breaking around us. There was more than one of them. I'd always believed there was just one. Lee and clinged on to me, and I wondered if we were about to die. Then, as if by some miracle, a gunshot was fired in the distance. These creatures scurried off in a hurry. "What just happened?" Cameron yelled out. I looked out to where the cabin was. Andy answered. "Adam, happened." We headed quickly back to the cabin, where we found a zombie target with a bullet hole in it, and Adam was sitting on the front porch holding what looked to be a hunting rifle. He'd been doing target practice and just happened to possibly have saved our lives. "Hey guys," Adam said, "You look like you saw a ghost or something." Cameron took his mask off and asked, "Where the heck did you get that gun?" "I brought it with me in case we wanted to do some shooting practice." "Is that a problem?" No, I think you saved our lives." We told Adam we'd explain tomorrow. For the time being, we went inside and had some drinks. My grandmother's cabin in the Russian countryside was always a comforting place. Hidden deep in the forest, it was a peaceful retreat away from the city's noise. When she fell ill and needed help, I offered to stay with her and take care of the place. The first few days went smoothly. I chopped wood, cooked meals, and kept an eye on her. The forest outside was calm, but there was an unusual quietness that felt heavy in the cabin. I thought it was just the isolation and the cold winter making everything feel still. One night while I was sitting by the fire, a loud bang came from the attic, which I had avoided due to its dark, creepy vibe. I tried toying it, telling myself it was just the house settling, but the banging continued. Thumps and dragging sounds that got louder as the night went on. I decided to check it out with a flashlight and a crowbar. I climbed the old squeaky stairs to the attic. The air was chilly and musty. When I reached the top, the noise stopped suddenly. I shone the flashlight around and saw old dusty furniture and forgotten items. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Just as I was about to go back down, I spotted a small door in the corner that I hadn't noticed before. It was slightly open, showing a narrow space beyond. I was hesitant, but felt a strong urge to see what was inside. I pushed the door open and found a small hidden room with a wooden chest covered in cobwebs. My heart raced as I opened the chest. Inside were old handwritten letters and photos of people I didn't know. They seemed very old, and one photo stood out. It was of a young woman who looked strikingly like my grandmother, but much younger. As I read the letters, I learned they were written by someone who had lived in the cabin long before my grandmother. The letters talked about strange things happening and a constant feeling of being watched. The last letter was particularly disturbing. It mentioned a hidden space in the attic where someone had disappeared years ago. The writer was convinced that something evil had taken them. The realization hit me hard. The noises and the feeling of being watched were not just my imagination. There was something about this cabin tied to its past that caused these strange events. The next morning I packed me things and decided to leave. I couldn't shake the feeling that the cabin had dark secrets best left alone. As I drove away, the forest seemed to watch me, the trees like silent witnesses to the cabin's eerie history. When I told my grandmother what I found, she was quiet. It was clear that the cabin had been hiding its secrets from her too. She thanked me for looking after her and for revealing the truth, though she didn't seem surprised now. Whenever I think of that cabin, I feel a shiver. The forest feels like it's waiting for the next person to uncover its dark secrets. The cabin stands as a chilling reminder that some places are better left alone, their mysteries buried under layers of dust and fear. Every time I remember that attic and those letters, a cold chill runs down my spine, and I wonder if the cabin is still watching, waiting for the next curious soul to discover what lies hidden in its depths. I need to give a little context before you know the rest of the story. My cousin and I were having fun for spring break at my cabin. She was 9 and I was 12 years old at the time. That day, my cousin and I were finished eating at a local restaurant near to the cabin. We were then told by one of our aunts that there was a swing set behind the place. We were excited, so once we were done eating, we went through the back door entrance of the restaurant. We walked down this path, wondering where these supposed swings were. Eventually we found an old, dirty and very ripped up couch sitting by this tall pine tree. We kept looking, and there we found it, a swing set along with the slide. At that point I no longer felt like swinging. I suddenly had a feeling of dread wash over me. I looked around as my cousin got on the swing, and I saw it, this mutilated monkey bar thing with a large black cord wrapped very loosely around the top. A yellow cord was also hung from it with a light fixture on the end hanging by its neck. From a black cloth was a baby doll. A few feet away from that was a human-sized doghouse, much too big for a dog, which gave me an even deeper sense of we need to get the heck out of here. I told my cousin, and she walked over to where I was standing. Then she gasped, "I think there's someone in the doghouse," she whispered to me, which made a chill go down my spine. We then heard this distant, high-pitched whirring sound above us. That was enough. The two of us turned tail and ran. Suddenly my leg decided at that momento cramp up, so I was limping after my cousin as fast as I could. We tried to tell my aunt, but she ignored us. We decided to keep the story to ourselves. I'm 15 now, and I'm still afraid of going back to that place. This story happened about 2 years ago. My friend Zach and I were on our way to a summer camp where we would spend a week. We were both pretty excited about it too. Soon arrived at the campground, and our parents signed sheets of paper I assumed were for some safety things. Once all the parents had left, we were assigned to cabins, and camp leaders my cabin had 8 other boys along with Zach and I. Our camp leader was a man named Peter. To be honest, Peter creeped me out a bit. He had long black greasy hair and pale white skin. He was in his early 20s, but he didn't seem like the outdoorsy kind. Offkey, the first 2 days they were great. Zach and I went canoeing, rock climbing, and swimming, typical camp activities. We met 2 girls named Jessie and Erica too. It was Wednesday afternoon around 5:30, and Eric and I were talking by this amazing spot by the river. She told me where she was from and what sports she played. I told her the same. She began to tell me about her grandparents' cabin nearby. That's when I noticed someone standing just a little ways up the path we took to get there. It was our camp leader, Peter. He was just standing there. Awkwardly, I waved at him, but he remained motionless. Erica noticed too and got creeped out, asking if we could go somewhere else. I agreed with her, and we left. Looking back as we walked away, I could still see Peter standing there. The dude gave me chills. Later that night, we were in the lodge with our cabin mates eating dinner. I asked Zach if he knew where Peter was. Said no, and I told him about Peter staring at me and Erica. He thought that was weird too, but didn't think much more of it. He told me to forget about it, to just enjoy the rest of the night. I then started thinking maybe I overreacted. He might have just been doing something else, I thought, but a part of me was wondering if he was doing something else. Why didn't he wave back at me? Didn't he move a muscle? Why was he just staring? Just then, Peter walked in and sat down across from me. He talked to some of the other boys, and he felt too uncomfortable to make eye contact that night. When everyone was sleeping, I awoke sometime late in the night with the urge to use the bathroom. We weren't supposed to go alone to the bathrooms, but everyone else was fast asleep, so I got up and threw on my flip-flops and went to the bathrooms. These restrooms were disgusting, but I did manage to find a cleanish stall, so I did my business. I was startled when I heard someone come into the bathroom, but I thought it was someone from another cabin. The person walked down the aisle off stalls and stopped right outside of mine. I could see his legs and feet. I was so creeped out, I didn't have the courage to ask who it was out there. He moved away from my stall. Then I thought he walked towards the exit. I started to ease up a bit. Music, but then the lights to the bathroom shut off and the door slammed shut. I couldn't believe what was happening. I heard footsteps walking closer to me, then they stopped. I called out then in a trembling voice, "Is anyone there?" I then felt a cold hand suddenly grab my leg. I screamed so loud I kicked the door open and ran as fast as I could out of there. I looked behind me just once and saw the most disturbing thing I've ever seen. Peter was chasing me wearing one of my shirts and my underwear. I ran all the way to the lodge, which I was so relieved to see was open still. Two of the camp leaders were inside talking and eating chips. They asked what was wrong, and I frantically told them about Peter. They called somebody up on the phone and told me to sit with him. They said I could stay in a spare room at the lodge. My parents came to pick me up early in the morning. The camp must have told them what happened. Either way, I was relieved to be leaving. A week later, Zach told me Peter never returned to the cabin. He wasn't even found on the campground. I didn't care. I was just happy that he was out of there. I won't be staying at an overnight camp ever again, and if you do, be careful. This is a story for my father. It takes place over his Mormon mission to the Philippines to teach people about the gospel and other things like that. This will be told from his point of view. It was late one night in the rural areas of the Philippines. I was in the men's shared house, the hut shared by the male half of that area's group. The sort of cabin wasn't anything special, only about 1 or 2 rooms, and it was mostly only used to sleep and get dressed in. However, it was difficult getting to sleep. That one particular night, I had stayed up much later than the rest of the hut. As I tried desperately to pass out on my sleeping mat, I was greeted with a loud knock at the front door. It woke up most of the other guys, so we went to answer it. We found the entire woman half of the group at our doorstep. Every one of them looked as if they had just seen some ghost. We asked what was wrong. They hysterically explained that they were sitting in their house, just talking and starting to try and get some sleep. Then one by one, they all felt as if they were being watched. They agreed that they no longer felt alone in that house. The bad feeling got so bad they all ran out of the house, slamming the door closed behind them, and hurried over here to us. No, being the leader of the group meant that I would be responsible for these kinds of situations, so me and a few others went to help 5 other guys, and I followed the girls back to their husido. Give you a bit of context, the women's house was much fancier than ours. It wasn't some rudimentary living space cabin type of thing. It was a very old house built around 2 centuries before be some colonizers. It was on stilts that rose a foot or 2 off the ground so that the house wouldn't be tilted on the rocky terrain. It had 10 to 12 rooms in it. The owner had lent to the Mormon organization to use as housing. But before he left, he had stated to our superiors that a few decades before, a few kids that were playing around crawled under the house. They'd found an old hand grenade from the war that had happened a couple of years prior. They began playing with it, but it went off, killing all the children that were still under the house. We arrived at their fancier cabin-like home, only to find that in their rush to leave, the girls had left their keys inside, locking themselves out. We checked the front door, the back door, even the windows, but everything was locked up tight. We began to argue as we returned to the big wooden front doors. I was so frustrated with the situation that I walked up to the door and kicked at it so hard it fell, and we entered and in small groups searched the house. Nothing appeared to be out of place other than the fact that there was one closet that was locked and the girls had no key for it. We dismissed it as nothing, and we told the girls that we'd spend the night in the house and the girls would sleep in the hut. After all, I'd already broken the door down and it could no longer be locked. The girls laughed and dust guys stayed up playing cards to pass the time. Eventually, we all got very drowsy after a while, and just as we were about to fall asleep, a deafening noise came from the closet. It was as if a massive box of heavy books was just dropped from several stories high, or actually, as I wondered about it, it sounded a lot like a muffled explosion. My partner, who I would go on daily routes with, immediately sprang up out of his chair and began pounding furiously at the door, yelling, "Open up!" I joined him in banging on the door for a few seconds, then stopped. The entire house was dead silent. I walked outside and looked for a window, and even under the house's stilts, trying to find some way to enter the closet, but came up with nothing. To this day, I still don't know what made that noise, but I can't help but think maybe it was the sound of that tragic event with the children replaying itself. I had always wanted to visit the French countryside. The thought of spending a few days in a quiet cabin away from everything sounded perfect, so I found a small cabin tucked away deep in the woods, far from the city noise. It seemed like the perfect place to relax. There was nothing around but trees and the sound of the wind. No cars, no people, just quiet. The first night was peaceful. I sat by the fire sipping on some wine and just watched the flames flicker. It was so quiet, almost too quiet there. Was something strange about the silence, but I told myself I just wasn't used to it. After living in the city for years, this kind of quiet would take some getting used to, but the second night was different. As soon as it got dark, I started feeling strange. It was like something wasn't right. I kept looking out the windows expecting to see something, but there was nothing, just trees and darkness. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was out there watching me. I tried reading to calm myself down, but I couldn't focus. Every creak of the floor, every gust of wind against the windows made me jump. A tone point. I thought I heard something outside, like someone walking through the leaves. I froze, listening closely, but the sound stopped just as quickly as it started. I hurried to lock the doors and shut all the windows, telling myself it was just an animal, but deep down I knew something wasn't right. The next morning, I decided to go for a walk through the woods, hoping it would help me relax. The fresh air helped at first, and I started to feel better, but after walking for a while I realized I had lost my way. The trees were thick, and everything started to look the same. I tried to find the path back to the cabin, but after about an hour of walking I knew I was lost. I didn't have a map, and my phone had no signal. Panic started to set in. I picked a direction and walked faster, hoping it would lead me back, but the deeper I went into the woods, the more confused I became. Everything around me looked identical. Endless trees, no landmarks, no signs of the cabin. By the time the sun started to set, I still hadn't found my way back. I knew I'd have to spend the night out there. I found a small open area and decided to stay there. As it got dark, the woods around me went completely silent again. That same feeling I had the night before returned, only worse this time. I didn't sleep. Every little sound, leaves moving, twigs snapping, made my heart race. At one point in the middle of the night, I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, careful steps. I held my breath, heart pounding. The footsteps stopped after a while, but I never heard them walk away. It was like whatever was out there had stopped, standing just out of sight, waiting. When the sun came up, I hurried to pack my things and walked as fast as I could. After hours of wandering, I finally saw the cabin through the trees, but something was wrong. The front door was wide open. I know I had locked it before I left. I walked inside carefully. Everything looked the same, but there was something strange about the air inside, like the place wasn't quite right. I checked all the windows. They were still locked from the inside, just as I had left them. Nothing seemed missing, but the feeling was still there that someone had been inside while I was gone. Watching, I didn't waste any time. I grabbed my things, left the cabin, and started driving. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, expecting to see someone standing in the doorway watching me leave. As I drove away, the feeling didn't go away. In fact, it got stronger, like something was still following me. Even now, months later, I can't shake the feeling. Every time I step outside, it feels like someone's watching from the shadows, waiting. I never saw anyone, but I know I wasn't alone in those woods. I don't think ever will be. I lived in Florida back then. I experienced this years ago. I was around 16. To set the scene, I'll tell you that I've always been a believer of the supernatural. In my free time, I would often study monsters and stories of encounters with them. On top of that, my mother is pagan and practices witchcraft, the good kind. Back then, I lived in a small wooded area on a gravel road with only one street light, and even that was halfway up the road from the house. The property was about 1.6 acres in total, but that doesn't include the woods. There were maybe 6 houses in my area, but you couldn't see most of them from our house, just the next door neighbors. There's a cabin just up the road about 500 feet from where my house was. We had some family friends living there that were paying rent. One night at this cabin, they were having a small party / get-together type of thing. My 2 older siblings, my parents, and a few other relatives were up there, playing loud music and drinking. My little sister and I were at the house. It was sometime around 7 p.m. It had just gotten dark, and my little sister was inside watching a movie. Rather, she was asleep on the couch with the movie on. Now, for some forgotten reason, I was outside. I don't know if I was just letting the dog out to use the restroom, or if I was just bored beating things with a stick like I've done before. But I heard something in the woods. Then it was over near where we usually had our bonfires. It was about a good 100 feet into the woods in a cleared area, and the tree line was another 75 feet give or take from where I stood. I couldn't see that far due to how dark it was and the trees, but I heard something moving around in there. Now, this isn't what bothered me. I had lived out there for my entire 16 years of life. I'd always heard things out in the woods. It was usually either a coyote or a fox, but this time it was different. This sounded heavier. I knew that there were no bears in our area, and the biggest thing out there was going to be a coyote, but This was far too heavy to be a coyote. I could hear it from the side of my house. I was a little scared then, so I began to slowly make my way towards the front of the house, keeping an eye on the woods and the direction of which the sound-off movement was coming from. As I reached the corner at the edge of my house that led to the front yard, still closely watching the woods, I saw them, two glowing pale discs that resembled eyes peeking out from the tree line. Now, as I mentioned earlier, my mother is pagan and practices witchcraft, so I began to wonder if she'd set up some sort of protection spell around the property, because the thing could move no further than the tree line. But then I swear it began to talk. It had the most bone-chilling voice I'd ever heard. It was this low, raspy, harsh sound, like it was being forced. It was calling to me, "Come here, I don't want to hurt you." Stood there motionless. It had spoken my name. How did it know my name? Every last instinct was telling me to run back inside the house. But I was terrified. I couldn't move. "Come here," Kite said in a harsher tone. "Come here, come here, come here." Realizing that it would not move past that tree line, I was able to find the strength to begin to move again. I had an idea of what the thing was. As I mentioned before, I always loved stories of monsters, and as I said, I've studied monsters and the like on the internet. I believed it to be a Wendigo or a skinwalker. That's when my fear was overtaken by a cocky 16-year-old confidence and anger. It also happens to be the moment I made a huge mistake. I picked up a nearby rock about half the size of my fist, and I yelled at the creature, "Get out of here," and I threw the rock at it. I don't know if I hit it or not due to how dark it was, but immediately after, the thing screeched so loud it shook my eardrums, and I nearly soiled myself when the rock I'd thrown moments before whizzed past inches from my head with such force it was lost in the woods on the opposite side of the house. I ran to the front door, rushing inside where my little sister was rubbing her eyes after waking up. I couldn't let her see the horror on my face. I couldn't let her know of the thing in the woods. I walked quickly to my room, where I drew the curtains closed and I hid in my bed until my family got home. After my family made it back and settled in, I went to my mother and hugged her, thanking her and telling her that I loved her. She asked me why I was thanking her like that, and I simply said for protecting the family. I then told her I didn't want to talk about the rest of it. Only found out about what happened that night just recently when my family was home discussing the supernatural. I've always loved summer camp, the friends, the fun, just getting away from reality. Well, I did enjoy it until about 4 years ago at my church camp here in North Carolina. It was only a few days into the first week of that camp, when we were all settled down in our cabin for bed, I kept hearing something from outside the window, like a wild animal or something of the sort was in the woods right beside us. About an hour later, everyone was asleep, but my curiosity was so strong I literally snuck out of the cabinus. I walked outside. It was so silent it gave me chills. I walked around for a while, looking for what in the world was making that noise. I think I was hoping to see something like a fox or a deer. Suddenly I jumped as I heard a snap from the woods right behind me. I turned around slowly, calling out, "Hello, music," but I received no answer. I made the very dumb decision to walk towards it. I looked into the deep darkness. My heart stopped as I saw an outline. I kid you not, it was almost like, while this may sound crazy, but it was like a lizard with the body of a mani. Saw two red eyes staring back at me. All of a sudden that thing began to run towards me, letting out a loud hiss. I screamed and ran as fast as I could back to the cabin. I was in such a panicked hurry that I woke up everyone else in the cabin. Our counselor practically jumped out of his bed, demanding to know what was wrong and why in the world I'd been outside alone. I explained everything to him. While I'm sure he didn't really believe me, he did go outside with a flashlight to make sure everything was okay. When he came back, he said he didn't find anything weird. He explained I was probably just hearing and seeing things in the dark, but I'm telling you now, it seems surreal. The very next day, I told my mom to come pick me up. It was pretty late when she arrived to take me home, and as we were leaving, I looked back in the woods, and I swear on my life I saw that same figure again. I screamed up my mother to look, but by the time she looked back, it was gone. I've done lots of research about what this could be. I did find one thing that is well known around the Carolina area. They call it the lizard man, but whatever it was, I just don't want to see it ever again. This happened in July of 2022. I live in the Uwharrie Mountains in North Carolina. We have goats and chickens and a large fenced-in area. One night, I'd gone to grab something out of my car when I heard my goats making distressed noises. I could hear them running around in the pasture. I went inside my house, grabbing my air-style rifle. I then jogged out to the pasture they were supposed to be in. When I got to the fence, I opened the gate and walked in, and I began to check on the goats, counting them all. After I counted all the livestock. I started walking around the fence line. I got to a point where the fence drops off to a valley or ravine. Just over the fence was this creature. Whatever it was, it had this grayish blue skin, almost like ash, and it looked like it didn't have a nose or lips. It had 5 fingers, and they looked like claws or long nails on each fingertip. Fong's eyes were this blue-gray color, almost the same as its skin. I locked eyes with it for a few seconds as I slowly clicked the safety off of Miracle, bringing it to my shoulder. As I did that, the creature let out this almost human-like scream. It sounded a lot like a woman yelling, but distorted as it screeched. It stood up and turned away from me. Swear that thing stood about 7 or 8 feet tall. It looked back at me one more time before it took off back into the woods. It moved so fast it looked like it almost vanished. I stood there dumbfounded for a minute, then I turned and ran back to my house. When I made it home, I locked the doors and let my mom know what I'd seen. I really don't think she believed a word of it, but I did insist on it. She noticed how scared I was. I talked to my dad about it too, and he told me to never go in the woods after it gets dark alone. Since then, I had a few weird things happen. In September, I was with my friends walking in the woods. Since we had a cabin close to my house, some of my friends stayed behind looking at some old housing structure about maybe a half a mile from the cabin. A few of my friends and I went ahead and had started to get late, so I turned around and headed back to where they were. As I got close to them, I heard my name being called and a distorted version of my friend's voice. To this day, I'm not entirely sure what I saw or heard. I almost think it was a Wendigo, but the area I live in doesn't really match what folklore I've heard. Then again, there is a Native American burial ground close to my house. If anyone can help me figure it out, that would be great. Music. Thank you for listening to another unsettling episode of Unexplained Encounters. You can send us your story to Javi. It narrated on the show at darkstories.org. Unexplained Encounters as an Eerie Cast original series. You can find other horror-themed podcasts at eeriecast.com, such as Redwood Bureau, a fictional anthology series, Freaky Folklore, a documentary-style series about myths and cryptids around the world, Destination Terror, show about the most haunted places, and Tales from the Break Room, another show I host all about the scary things that happen to people at work. Again, that's eeriecast.com. By the way, if you want fewer annoying ads and you want to support what we do, consider going to eeriecast.com plus to sign up for EerieCast Plus. That unlocks all our podcasts with all but host red ads removed. Until next time, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one. Again, it was late evening when we got the call. Someone had tipped us off about some illegal stuff going on at an old cabin deep in the woods. The plan seemed easy: go and check for any signs of crime and arrest anyone inside. It sounded simple enough. I had been doing this job long enough to know that things rarely ever go as smoothly as they sound. Still, I had my team with me, and we were all ready for it. We parked a few miles out from the cabin and walked the rest of the way through the woods. The forest was quiet, too quiet. Normally you'd hear some birds, or at least the wind blowing through the trees, but that night it felt like the whole place was holding its breath. It didn't scare me, but something about it made me uneasy. It was just that feeling you get when you know something isn't right, but you can't put your finger on it. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the trees, and the cabin was barely visible up ahead, just an old rundown building with a single light on inside. As we got closer, I could feel the tension in the group. Everyone was on edge. We moved in quietly, checking around the outside of the cabin. The place looked like it had been abandoned for a while, but someone had towed inside. There were fresh tire marks in the mud outside, and that light didn't turn on by itself. I broke off from the others, moving around the back of the cabin. My flashlight cut through the darkness, barely lighting up the area in front of me. Then I smelled it, a strong, sharp smell in the air. Metallic and heavy blood. I knew it right away. I told the others to wait, not to move in just yet. I got closer to the cabin, crouching down by the back window. When I looked inside, my stomach dropped. There was Amon tied to a chair in the middle of the room. His head was hanging forward, and the floor underneath him was covered in blood. I couldn't tell from where I was if he was dead or alive, but it was bad, real bad. This wasn't just some small CME time. This was something much worse. Micus tightened with the feeling that we had walked into something we weren't prepared for. I gave the signal, and we entered the cabin right away. I could tell this wasn't just about drugs or something simple. Whoever had done this had been brutal. The man in the chair didn't move. His skin was pale, his eyes wide open, staring at nothing. Whoever had done this left recently, but not long enough for the blood to dry. As the others checked the place, something caught my eye. The floorboards under the chair looked uneven, like they had been pulled up and put back down. I knelt beside them and pried one of the boards loose. Underneath there was a small space, And inside it was a camera still recording. Whoever had done this had been watching. Maybe they still were. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I looked around the cabin. This wasn't just some crime scene, it was a setup. We were being watched, like this was all part of a bigger plan. That's when I saw it. A small red dot appeared on the wall, flickering around before landing on my chest. For a split second my heart raced. A sniper's laser. We weren't alone. I signaled the others to stay low, and we quietly slipped out of the cabin. We moved quickly but carefully back to the tree line. I kept looking over my shoulder, waiting for the worst. They knew we were there. They saw us leave, but no shots were fired. No one chased us. We made it back to the vehicles without a word. The whole time my mind was racing, trying to figure out why they hadn't taken the shot. Why did they let us walk out of there? Maybe they wanted us to find the body. Maybe the whole thing had been a setup just to show us what they were capable of. We wrote up our reports, but nothing came of it. There were no leads, no suspects. The cabin was wiped clean of any fingerprints or useful evidence. The only thing left behind was that camera still rolling, and the unsettling feeling that someone was out there watching us the whole time. Weeks passed, but the feeling never left me. I couldn't shake the thought that whoever had let us go that night was still out there, still watching. It was like a dark shadow hanging over me, always there, always waiting. The scariest part wasn't that we had been let go, it was knowing that it wasn't over. Not for me, not for my team. We hadn't been spared. We had been marked. Whoever they were, they weren't done yet. I could feel it, I could sense it. Every time I walked into the station, every time I went out on another call, they were waiting, and one day they were going to finish what they started. One year, as summer drew near, my mom sent me away to camp so that I wouldn't be a bother. I wasn't a stranger to this camp, had been going to it for the past 4 years, but as an older kid I had to prepare myself mentally. This was a horse camp, so I knew all the younger kids who made up the majority of the place would be screaming and fighting over the prettiest pony. Now this camp was old as bones. The lodges we stayed at were made of wood with tarps as roofs and cots as beds. That year I was paired up with 2 little girls named Lizzie and Callie, as well as an older girl named Rosie. On the first night before I went to bed, I visited my horse named Bonzi. Bonzi was a white Arabian. I remember brushing Bonzi that night completely alone in the barn. Suddenly nearby I heard this clattering sound like someone had dropped a brush, so I put my own brush down and exited the stall to see what fell. But I didn't find anything weird. I shrugged it off and re-entered the stall, and as soon as I did I looked up to see Bonzi completely whizzing out. She was crying and trying to escape with this terrified look in her eyes. Eventually I managed to calm her down. Then I calmed down the other horses who had gotten scared from her being scared. After that I locked up and booked it back to my lodge. As the day came to a close, I sat on the porch of our lodge. I knew something was wrong, though not just what happened with Bonzi either, because usually I felt at home in these woods, but so far I felt so tense being out here in these woods, like it wasn't the same forest anymore. On the 3rd day, the anxious feeling hadn't gone away. At the end of the day's writing lessons, I swear I saw something vanishing into the woods. I had turned my head to see what it was, and in that instant Bonzi's big old horse hoof slammed right onto my foot. I was forced to skip out on some activities, but nothing else happened for the rest of the day. Then came the night of the 5th day. It must have been around 1 or 2 Ami was awakened by Lizzie and Callie, who needed a light for the way back from the bathroom. I told them I would just sit on the deck with my flashlight on and wait for them, so they were off, and I sat on the deck. As I sat there, I felt a chill creep up my spine. Hello, I called out, feeling as if I wasn't alone. It was a stupid question to ask. Then suddenly heard rustling. I spun around and stared at the end of my cabin, just as anyone would fear, as if it was straight from a nightmare. At the edge of the cabin, peeking around the corner, was a face. I screamed then. This wasn't a normal face I'd glimpsed. This was a dark black figure with no skin and sunken in white eyes. I dropped my light and ran back inside, knowing it was running after me. By the sound of wood being slammed underneath feet, I turned back to see the door being shaken and rattled. I wanted to scream again, but all I could do was hold on to the door, too scared to let go. I then began to wonder, what would it do to me or Rose if it got in? I was crying then, my heart racing. Then I heard it soon open the door. It was just Lizzie and Callie. I swung the door open and pulled them inside. There's a man outside. Me heart sank. Did he hurt you? No, I'm okay. Why are you scared? Because we saw him too, Lizzie explained. For the rest of the night, Lizzie, Callie, and I slept in the same bed. Nothing else happened until the last night, where the cabins were split up in a game of glow-in-the-dark tag. We tried to forget what happened in the previous night and hid in the barn. Big mistake. Lizzie and I had been Hiding in there for a while, we were sitting up next to the hay bales silently talking when we heard footsteps. We smiled, thinking it was one of the campers coming to look for us. We peered over the ledge to see who it was, and our hearts sank. A tall, lanky black figure stood in the middle of the barn. It was hunched over. It had long claws. I slammed my hand over Lizzie's mouth and backed away into the hay. I could feel both our hearts pounding as we sat waiting. For what seemed like hours, it began to look around in the hay, standing over 6 feet tall. I could hear it making grunts, but eventually it laughed. When I felt safe, I grabbed Lizzie and dashed out of the barn, running away. That was the last we glimpsed of that creature. I have no idea what it was. I don't know why I decided to just appear that year, but not during any of the years prior or after. I simply know that I'll be happy if I never see it again. Aid was at the start of my 6th grade year. My whole class would be going on a 3-day trip to learn about caring for the earth and whatnot. It was the first night there, and the girls were split into 2 different cabins, if you could call them cabins at all. They were more like wooden tents with broken fly screens for doors, which made it the perfect spot for mosquitoes. It was only the girls that had to sleep in these wooden tents because the boys apparently got actual cabins with working doors and air conditioning. The camp guides, or whatever you call them, gave us thin mats to sleep on, which, by the way, were extremely uncomfortable. Come nighttime, all the girls were outside of the cabins complaining about which cabin was the quietest, and in my opinion none of them were, while half of the girls were outside complaining. My friend Jamie and I were inside caring for some people who happened to get a cold due to the freezing tints we had. We thought it was kind of fun to play doctors, and we felt like we were invincible to the dreaded cold everyone else was getting, even though eventually Jamie did catch the cold later that night. As all the girls had finally stopped debating, one of them knocked my water bottle over, spilling the water all over my sleeping bag. I was a little bit annoyed, but I knew he wasn't really going to sleep that night anyway. Around the middle of the night, most of the people in our cabins were asleep except for Jamie and I. Around that time, our friend Maddie woke up. She told us she was going to the bathroom, so she put on her glasses, got her water bottle, and left to go into the bathroom from our tent. The bathrooms were about a 3-minute walk away, and you can see them from the tent. After about 5 minutes of Jamie and a talking, Jamie brought up Maddie and asked if maybe we should go check to see if she was okay. I told Jamie that she's probably fine, but if she does take too long, we can go and check on her 10 minutes later. Jamie brought up Maddie again and that maybe we should go check, so Jamie went up to the bathrooms whilst I stayed in the tent. I went to steal Maddie's sleeping bag because mine was soaked, to find that Maddie was still in her sleeping bag. She had never left. She had the sleeping bag over her face. I'm not sure how we didn't notice that. I was very confused because we never saw her come back. When a confused Jamie came back from the bathrooms, she saw Maddie there and looked just as bewildered as I was. Maddie explained to us that she never went to the bathrooms that night, that whoever they saw who got up and went to the bathrooms was not her but Jamie and I were right next to her. We were absolutely sure it was her, and we recall the exact same thing. It wasn't a surprise to Maddie, as she very frequently experiences the paranormal. Even to this day, we never found out who or what that thing was. I was on a church retreat last winter up in Pennsylvania. We stayed at a sort of campsite, nothing fancy, just a big cabin with 20 rooms, a living room, kitchen, and 2 bathrooms. I unpacked my things and met my roommate. He was pretty chill, and we had a lot in common that day. I heard a couple of my friends talking about the Mafia House. It was my first time on the retreat. I had no idea what that was. I joined in on the conversation and asked about it. They said the Mafia House was a haunted house just up on the hill away from the cabin. I looked out the window, and there it was, an old abandoned 3-story home. It kind of reminded me of the house from The Conjuring. They told me that it was rumored that they kept all the dead bodies up in the attic. I then said, why don't we explore? They looked at each other, and we all agreed. We got 4 of my friends and my roommate together to go explore that house. I had a power LED flashlight, and so did me friend. I wasn't expecting any trouble, though. We'd be going the following day, and when that day arrived, my roommate and I walked around the house trying to find an entrance. The front door was locked. The back door was no use either. The last door, which was the basement door, opened without any trouble. I called my roommate over, and we both looked at each other. Eventually, he said, well, let's go tell everyone else. We headed back to the cabin and told our friends we found a way inside. They all backed out when they heard we'd have to go through the basement. My roommate and I were pretty disappointed, but we agreed we were still going to explore. The following day, which was the last day of the retreat, we played a game of basketball, and in the middle of the game you acted like we were going to take a break, but actually we headed up to the Mafia House. My roommate paused and stopped. He just kept looking at the place. Eventually he just said to me, you know why risk it? I gave him a confused look. He went on, We might get in trouble, we might get possessed, we might. I gave an angry look and yelled at him, "Yuri, just gonna back out now?" He looked disappointed at that, then replied, "Yes, I guess I am." I shook my head, irritated. "Fine, I'll go by myself." I half ran, half walked toward the house. Not even looking back in my anger, I got to the basement door, grabbed the handle, and pondered for a moment. I ignored every thought, most of which were telling me don't do it, but finally I budged the rusty metal door open once. Inside, I shut the door behind me. No, it was a bad idea. And I still regret it, but I didn't want anyone getting suspicious seeing the door open like that. My mission was to make it to the Atikto Sea. If the rumors were true that there were bodies stashed up there, I turned on my flashlight. The basement was laid out oddly. There was a boiler in the side of the room with pipes stretched across the floor. Not too creepy so far. I walked through the basement slowly. I saw piles of junk like cloth, food, beer bottles. Atmospheric, sure, but not creepy yet. The place also reeked of an odor that almost made me throw up. I adventured deeper into the concrete basement. I soon found another pile. This one was made up of children's toys, like 20th century looking baby dolls, old toy cars, and wind-up toys. My heart started racing and thoughts played in my head that I needed to leave. But I didn't listen to them. I moved on. I stopped again when I got to the stairs that led to the first floor. I didn't even get to the first step before I heard a creaking noise above. Might sounded like someone was walking around on the first floor, but whoever they were, they weren't walking in a straight line. It sounded like someone pacing back and forth. I stood there still as a statue, and I turned on my flashlight. I could hear my heart nearly pounding out of my chest, and I could barely hear the footsteps anymore over it. I waited for the steps to stop, and about 2 minutes later, which felt like forever, they finally did. Still, I stood there. It was so quiet then in that basement you could hear a pen drop. Suddenly, I heard a door creak open and slam from above. May didn't stay there any longer. I ran away from those steps, tripping over one of the pipes. I fell and dropped my flashlight. It clicked off as it fell and began to scour the floor in the dark with my hands, looking for the flashlight. Then I heard footsteps again. This time they were in front of me in the basement. As luck would have it, I quickly felt my flashlight, picked it up and ran for the door, barely finding the door at all. When I made it outside, I ran all the way back to the cabin. My roommate was still there and saw me running. I told him everything that happened along with my other friends, and none of them believed me. Still to this day, as we left that camp, I looked back at the house and I saw a figure. I tried to make them out as best I could. It appeared to be a figure of a man. I turned away for only a moment, and when I looked back, the figure was gone. I never went back to that house, but ever since I explored the mafia house, I've been hearing weird noises at me own place. In a small Southern Baptist household in rural Kentucky, a place where church wasn't just on Sunday, but a way of life. Anything satanic was the stuff of nightmares that was occasionally whispered about in sermons and Sunday school. That was something you should never mess with. So, when my mom first told me what she and my grandparents had found deep in the hills, it stuck with them for over a decade. This happened back in the early 2000s. My mom, my uncle, and my grandparents went horseback riding one summer afternoon on a long, narrow trail that cuts through thick wood behind my grandfather's farm. They'd gone about 2 or 3 miles when the trees finally opened up into a small clearing. Right in the center of it stood an old rotting cabin. They said the roof sagged in the middle, boards warped, and it was dark from rain and age. There were no windows, just black, empty holes. Curiosity got the better of them. They tied up the horses and stepped inside. Immediately they could sense the place felt wrong. There were half-burnt candles sitting on a wooden shelf near the door. The wax still soft like they'd been lit recently. On the walls and ceiling were huge hand-painted symbols roughly smeared black against the gray wood. And on the floor, right in the center of the cabin, was a pink pentagram drawn in what looked like thick paint. My grandfather thought it had to be kids. Some punks sneaking out there to play around, pretending to do rituals. But the more they looked, the less it made sense. Why come this far into the woods for a prank? There were no houses nearby, no campsites, no roads. Smells of trees. You wouldn't even find that clearing again unless you already knew where it was. The air smelled faintly metallic, like blood and candle smoke. My mom told Mesh felt watched the entire time they were inside. My grandfather didn't waste time. As soon as they got back home, he called the sheriff's department to report what they found. The deputy sounded uninterested and almost amused. They won't bother you unless you bother them. That was it. There was no investigation, no anything. After that, my grandfather kept a closer eye on his property. If he heard footsteps or movement in the woods at night, he'd grab a flashlight and scan the tree line, but nothing ever came of it. Eventually, life went on. Fast forward around 10 years. It was 2012 and I was 14. I had grown up hearing the story and I couldn't stop thinking about it. Part of me wanted to believe it was some old local legend, but another part of me needed to see it for myself. One afternoon, I asked my grandpa if we could go looking for it again, and to my surprise, he agreed. We set off down the trail, winding through thick trees and overgrown brush. The deeper we went, the quieter it got. No birds, no insects, just the sound of our boots crunching leaves. It took nearly an hour to reach the clearing, but when we did, I recognized it instantly from how my mom described it, and the cabin was still there, barely standing. The roof had caved in more. The ivy was climbing up on one side, and the door hung off one hinge. And that's when we stepped inside, and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. And there it was, the pentagram faint, but still visible on the warped floorboards. The paint had faded, but you could still see the lines, jagged and uneven. The giant black handprints in the ceiling hadn't washed away either, smeared so high you'd have to stand on a chair just to reach them. The candles were long gone, but their melted outlines were burnt into the wood itself. My grandpa stood there quietly. I filmed the whole thing on my phone, but never uploaded it anywhere. I couldn't shake the feeling that the air inside the cabin was more than stale. Like cursed, we didn't stay long. Grandpa said we should go, and we did. As we walked back through the wood, I kept glancing over my shoulder. Every now and then, I swore I saw movement behind a tree. We never went back. To this day, I wonder who painted those symbols out there, what they were trying to bring up. Was it a prank or something real? I currently work the overnight shift at a residential treatment facility for troubled youth. Our original facility was out in the country. It was originally a hunting cabin before being refurbished and adding on for this purpose. This facility closed down recently and relocated to a more central facility in the city, which used to be a home for young mothers. I've had multiple experiences at both locations. Despite my prior history of paranormal occurrences, I don't usually assume every weird thing is paranormal in nature, especially with my graveyard shift hours. I sometimes might chalk them up to the effects of fatigue, but my experiences were validated after sharing them with some coworkers who had worked there a lot longer than I have. In our old facility from my office, you can see directly down the hallway, of which were clients' rooms. One night, out of the corner of my eye, while doing paperwork around 4 a.m., I saw a pale shape emerge quickly from one of the rooms and then dart back inside without making a sound. Now, since I wear glasses, my peripheral vision is very blurry. And since I saw this out of the corner of my eye, I figured it must have been one of the clients. It seemed unusual, though, because the clients do not wear anything that pale. Also, why would they dart out and back in so quickly in the middle of the night? Suspicious either way. So, as soon as I saw it, I got up and quickly went to the doorway in question to see if the clients were okay. It took me about 5 seconds to cover the distance. When I got there, the clients were clearly asleep. No way anyone could have gotten out of bed into the hallway and back into bed so quickly without making a single sound or seeming so convincingly asleep, since it was quiet enough and the building old enough that I could even hear when clients simply turned over in bed. That was the most noticeable one there. There were other times I saw shadowy figures from the corner of my eye, but they were gone so quickly when I looked closer that it might have just been my imagination. Also, there was a time when a set of curtains rustled and moved slightly on their own. Even though there was no draft that could have moved them, as I checked, no nearby vents, all windows shut and locked, and there was no wind outside, nothing else could have made them stir. After relating my sightings of the pale figure to a Seorker, they laughed and said it must have just been the lady in white. Apparently, multiple staff and clients over the years have reported seeing a female figure in white. No idea who it could have been, though. These ones didn't happen to me personally, but I also heard stories of kitchen cabinets opening and closing on their own, books flying off bookshelves, and multiple sightings of shadowy figures. Now at our new facility, the one that had been used as a home for young mothers, the activity has died down considerably, though this facility has its own share of spooks. On one of my first nights here, I heard footsteps in the hallway approaching the office. In this facility, the office is on a corner and you can't really see anything from inside except the opposite hallway wall. You have to leave the office to see down either hallway. I assumed it was a client awake and was about to ask for something. So, I peeked my head out of the door, but there was no one there. The footsteps sounded light and fast, like a child's. This facility is very well lit, even at night. And if someone were approaching the office, you could see their shadows on the walls before you actually saw them. One night, I saw what looked like a person's shadow moving across the wall in the way you'd expect an actual person to follow. So again, I peeked my head out and there was no one there. A couple other times, out of the corner of I saw the edge of a figure passing by the office window as if they just passed by and were going down the hall. Both times, what little I saw of the figure before it disappeared just appeared black and adult-sized. I have also heard footsteps a few times, including with a new coworker who was just training one night. That was kind of nice because I knew for sure then that it wasn't just my imagination as he heard them too and got freaked out. I related these occurrences to my new supervisor who had worked in this building for a long time. They shrugged them off and just stated very matter-of-factly that this building is haunted. Before my current company took over management of this facility, it had previously been run by a Catholic religious organization, and it had been staffed by nuns. My supervisor told me that they and others have seen figures of nuns in the hallways before, as well as the apparition of a young girl. They suspect that might have been what was making the childlike footsteps. Before my own experiences here started, my supervisor did warn me that I might hear strange noises at night, but they were usually nothing to be concerned about. None of these things have really freaked me out that much, though. I mostly just find it amusing, and I actually enjoy being in a place where coworkers have experienced things, and I don't feel so alone or feel like I can't tell anyone because I'm afraid they'll think I'm crazy or a liar. It's the first job I've worked where paranormal occurrences are so commonplace and believed. I wonder if it's because of all the negative energy surrounding our troubled clients. What do you all think? Through my younger years, from about 7. This all happened back in 2011 over the 4th of July weekend in a remote stretch of forest. I didn't witness it firsthand, but the guy who told me my friend Todd was there. And after hearing what he went through, I still don't like being alone in cabins. Todd was invited up to a family friend's cabin by a guy called Adam. The plan was simple: 3 days of drinking, barbecuing, and chilling. Adam promised to introduce Todd to a girl he knew, someone he thought he did it off with. Todd was 24 at the time, and as he put it, looking forward to a weekend of fun and bad decisions. The cabin itself sat halfway up a hill, surrounded by dense pine. The nearest neighborhood was miles away. No self-service. That first night went exactly how you'd expect. Beer, music, plenty of flirting. Todd and the girl hit it off fast, and by midnight, they disappeared downstairs into the basement bedroom. A while later, Adam left to grab something from a friend's house down the road, supposedly just for an hour or so. That was when Todd heard the sound of footsteps upstairs again. He figured Adam was back, but when voices joined in, unfamiliar ones, he hesitated. His date froze too. He got up half-dressed and went upstairs to check. And that's when he saw Chester. Chester was a guy Todd hated. They'd had some ugly history a year before, Todd said his stomach dropped the moment he saw Chester standing in the living room talking to Adam like they were old buddies. So Todd asked, "What the hell's he doing here?" Adam shrugged, trying to play it off. But Todd wasn't having it, and the argument escalated quickly. Chester stood there awkwardly, hands in his pockets, while Adam's girlfriend Sarah came out of the kitchen to see what was going on. Todd didn't even realize she was there until she looked at him shirtless, barefoot, still flushed from the basement. Mortified, he stormed downstairs again, shouting that he was leaving first thing in the morning. The tension simmered for another hour before Adam suggested everyone cool off with a swim down at the creek. Todd didn't want to go, but Adam and Sarah left anyway, with Chester tagging along. In the chaos, Adam grabbed Todd's shorts to wear, not realizing they had Todd's wallet, keys, and cigarettes in the pockets. And by the time Todd noticed they were gone, Todd was still furious. When the group returned, he marched upstairs as soon as he heard them come in and demanded the return of his stuff. Adam laughed, saying he'd give him back in the morning. But Todd wasn't laughing. "You have my wallet, dumbass. Give me my stuff now." The argument reignited louder this time. Sarah Trieto diffused it and Todd's date stood behind him, clearly uncomfortable. This time, Chester decided to insert himself, stepping between them and telling Todd to calm down. And that's when things almost turned violent. Todd had a temper and Chester knew it, but he didn't back down. Adam finally said, "You know what? Fine. We're going out again." And with that, he and Sarah left into the woods. Chester stayed behind for reasons best known to himself, claiming he didn't feel like swimming. He slumped down on the couch with Todd Spitbull for company. No one saw Adam and Sarah again that night. When morning came, Adam still wasn't back. Chester brushed it off, saying they probably passed out at a friend's place. But when the second night came and went, Todd began to worry. Adam's truck was still out front, his phone still in his backpack. On the third morning, Todd tried calling Sarah's phone again. This time, she actually picked up. Todd said she sounded groggy and confused, and when he asked where Adam was, she froze. "What do you mean?" she said. "He's not with you?" That's when Todd's blood ran cold. "He left with you 2 nights ago," he said. There was a long silence. Then Sarah whispered, "Oh my God," before hanging up. Within an hour, she caught back crying, saying she thought Adam had gone back to the cabin after a fight they'd had. She said she left him on the trail and walked back to the main road, assuming he'd find his own way home. Todd was furious, but also terrified. They were miles from town, deep in the woods, and Adam had been gone for a long time in freezing temperatures. He called some friends from the city to help search. They combed through the woods all afternoon, shouting Adam's name until their throats were raw, but they couldn't find anything. And by evening, they called the sheriff's department. When Sarah told the police that Adam's last known whereabouts were his cabin arguing with Todd, things took a sharp turn. That night at dawn, Todd and the others were jolted awake by the sound of boots punching on the porch. The front door was kicked in and flashlights blinded them. Armed men shouted commands. It was a full SWAT team. Todd said it happened so fast he barely had time to react before he was on the ground with a knee in his back. The dog was barking like crazy, and one of the officers told him that he would shoot the dog if it didn't be quiet. Chester was still half asleep, raised his head, and yelled, "Don't shoot the dog. He's not doing anything." They cuffed all 3 of them and dragged them outside while detectives started tearing through the cabin. Todd kept asking what was happening, but no one would answer. Eventually, one detective pulled him aside and said, "You were the last one seen with Adam. You 2 argued. You have a history of violence. Where is he?" Todd's were up and down. He didn't know anything. He hadn't seen Adam since the argument. And that's when they told him they found blood, tiny drops on some clothes near the hot tub. Todd said he didn't recognize them, but it didn't matter. For hours, Todd sat in that cabin being interrogated. Chester and Todd's date were questioned, too, but it was clear the focus was him. Meanwhile, outside, Sarah and rescue teams scoured the forest. Drones buzzed overhead. ATVs rumbled through the trails. Then, sometime around noon, everything went quiet. Todd said he could feel it. A few minutes later, they heard the helicopter. Everyone stepped out onto the porch as the chopper circled overhead, lowering something large and pale in a rescue sling. It was Adam. He was naked, his skin blue from the cold and barely conscious. They said he'd been found 5 m from the cabin deep in the woods, lying in a mossy rock beside the creek. He'd been missing for almost 4 days. The rescue team said if they'd found him a few hours later, he'd have been dead. When he finally woke up in the hospital, the story came out. Adam and Sarah had gone walking after the argument that night. At some point, she'd stolen his debit card and he confronted her about it. They argued again and she took off, literally ran away down the trail back towards the main road. She hitched a ride from there and turned off her phone for the next few days to avoid him. Adam, drunk and furious, wandered deeper into the woods. He must have taken a wrong turn and lost the trail completely. He had no clothes, no shoes, nothing. When search and rescue found him, he was delirious and mumbling about the lights in the trees. That was the part Todd never forgot. Adam told them saw lights, white ones, moving between the trees. He said he heard whispering voices that sounded like they were coming from everywhere all at once. At one point, he said he saw figures following him naked and pale with eyes that reflected like animals. He thought he was hallucinating from dehydration. But the weird thing is the search team confirmed there were no signs of wildlife or people anywhere near where they found him. After that, Adam refused to go back to the cabin and he sold it the following year. Todd moved out of state not long after. Said he still dreams about that night sometimes. The police choked the blood in his clothes up to an old injury or from someone else's visit, and the case was closed, and I don't think he has any intention of going to a remote cabin again anytime soon. This summer, I went camping in the rural. Fire. To this day, I still don't understand what really happened that night. It was 2016. A few of us had driven out to this old rental cabin deep in the woods outside of Missoula, Montana. It wasn't anything fancy, just a one-story shack with a tin roof, a wood-burning stove, and a deck that was leaning slightly downhill. Very precarious and not really somewhere we wanted to stand. The owner was a friend's uncle, and we'd been told we could use it as long as we didn't burn the place down. That's a direct quote, by the way. Funny how that turned out. So, there were 6 of us there that night. We were 19, maybe 20, a few of us all in college or just getting there. We had a cheap Bluetooth speaker, warm beer, and a few bottles of vodka Samyon's older brother had bought, too. The night was supposed to be relatively chill. My best friend was Ryan. I'd known him since the 7th grade. He, however, had been having a rough year, dropped out of school and began working nights at a warehouse. That weekend was supposed to be his reset button. I remember him sitting across from me at the kitchen table, red cup in hand, talking about how he wanted to move west and start over elsewhere. We all laughed and told him he wouldn't be able to hack it. Bet I'd find better friends. He joked that IT got late fast. And by the time we stumbled back inside, the fire and the stove had burnt low, just a dull red glow behind the glass. The air smelled like smoke. I remember falling onto one of those creaky bunk beds near the back of the cabin, and Ryan crashed beside me, still wearing his hoodie. The rest of the group was scattered, 2 on the couch, 1 on the floor, and 1 still outside by the fire pit. That's the last thing I remember. And the next part is a bit hard to explain because I woke up to Ryan shaking me hard. His hands were on me shoulders, his face inches from mine, and his voice wasn't slurred nor sleepy, but sharp and clear. Buddy, this is serious. You need to wake up. It wasn't like being half awake or dreaming. It was real. I could see the way his eyes looked wild and alert with the glow of something orange behind him. And that's when I smelled the acrid, thick stench of burning. The air was hot against my face, and when I looked past him, the entire room was being engulfed in flames. I don't know how I was asleep through it. Smoke was rolling across the ceiling like storm clouds. The wall on the stove was already on fire. Everything clicked at once. My throat seized up. The air was too thick to breathe. Ryan backed away, shouting something I couldn't even make out. An instinct just took over. I jumped up, ran towards the window, and dove straight through it. I hit the ground outside shoulder first and rolled down the dirt slope behind the cabin. For a second, I couldn't hear anything except the blood in my ears. Then the sound of the fire hit like a jet engine roaring, snapping wood and glass shattering. I look up and saw flames burst out the window. Within seconds, the whole roof was on fire. It moved so fast it didn't make sense. 1 minute the cabin was standing there, the next it was collapsing in on itself like it was made off paper. I screamed Ryan's name until my throat bled. My other friends came stumbling out, one through a side window, one crawling through the door with his arm burnt, another dragging the last guy by his shirt. Someone was yelling, someone else was crying. The whole forest was blazing orange. It felt like hell had opened up right in front of us. The fire department didn't get there for nearly half an hour. By then, the cabin was nothing but a skeleton of charred beams and glowing ash. We stood in a cluster by the dirt road wrapped in blankets someone had pulled from a truck, watching our weekend turn into a nightmare. They found Ryan's body the next morning under the bed. The coroner said he likely rolled off the mattress when the smoke filled the cabin and passed out before he even had a chance to wake up. Smoke inhalation quick and painless. But that couldn't be right because I saw him. I felt him shake me awake. I heard his voice in my ear, urgent and terrified. I told the police exactly what happened during the interview the next day. The two officers exchanged a look. Then one of them said gently, "Son, are you sure it wasn't just a dream?" It wasn't a dream. He woke me up. He sighed and wrote something down in his notebook. But they never found any sign that Ryan had moved from where they found him. He had never even gotten out of bed. But if he hadn't, who or what shook May awake? A week later, I went to his funeral closed casket. I remember standing by his parents, staring at a framed picture of him smiling with a fishing rod, trying not to cry. After the service, his mom came up to me and hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. I wanted to tell her what happened, how till the very end he looked out for me or his ghost. I still didn't really know what to believe, but I couldn't. I didn't sleep right for months after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd feel the guilt that he woke him up, and I still can't explain how. The coroners must have been wrong, surely. I still don't know if it was carelessness or something worse. We never found out how exactly the place set on fire. But I do know one thing. If Ryan hadn't woken me, I would have died. I went back to the site about a year later. The ground was still charred black, covered in broken glass and rusted nails. There wasn't much left, really. But standing there, I felt something I can't explain. And I said out loud, "Hey buddy, thank you for saving me." I turned around, half expecting to see my friend again. But of course, there was no one there. I've told this story a few times over the years, how my best friend's ghost woke me up and saved my life. And I'm still here, eternally grateful for him, helping me when I needed it most. Nevada area. The area I was in has a lot of Native American roots and history. This will be important for later. My dad and my younger sister and I decided to pack up early and hike down the mountain to go spend some time with our cousins who lived in a small town nearby. Calling it a town is charitable. You know, when you're on a road trip and you pass through a little area with a gas station or maybe a small, slightly outdated-looking grocery store and you wonder who works there and there aren't many houses near and it seems like something that was supposed to be attached to something bigger but was forgotten about. Well, this was the case for where my cousins lived. Down the road from the gas station and the Burger King, down another dirt road and a few more turns, and you soon find where all these people live. It's like a little secret neighborhood, but all the houses are separated by big lots of land. It's the ranchers' life out in the valley. Everybody is related in some way, either by blood or marriage, and almost too close friendship if you ask me. It's a quiet corner of the world that, unless you know someone who lives there, you'll never even know exists. Anyway, my cousins recently moved there into a lavish wooden cabin. We stayed for 2 nights, and on the last night something I think about often occurred. My cousins and my younger sister and I had all finished playing a late-night game of cards. It was dark out and most everyone else was in their rooms sleeping. The only light that was on was the kitchen light, and moths swarmed the kitchen window and back door to try and access the light. We were all tired. So after we finished the game, we cleaned up and I offered to take the cards out to the back porch. Since my cousins had just moved there, they hadn't unpacked everything. So they left their game boxes out on the back porch. I took the deck and stepped out the sliding door. All on my own into the quiet nighttime, I bent down to try and rearrange the stack of games so that I could make it nicer than I found it. My back was turned towards the thick brush and trees. Bugs were swarming around me and the dingy porch light. Strangely enough, I heard what I can only describe as offhand whistling. At first, I thought it was my dad because the whistle was the exact same whistle my dad uses to let us know it's time to leave. It's one of those things in life you never really acknowledge. Something small that feels like you're the only one who notices it. Something mundane and unspoken, yet comforting. It whipped my head to the window beside me, but didn't see anything. My dad was asleep somewhere. I was sure of it. The whistling repeated 3 to 5 more times. I was less scared, more confused, still hunched over the box of games. I turned my head to the forest just for a moment, and despite my curiosity, I knew it was time to leave. Slightly ironic, right? I walked inside and went to sleep. I didn't mention it to my cousins as I didn't want to scare them, and I still haven't said much about it even after we left the area. Whatever or whoever was whistling so faintly that only someone who has heard that whistle before would recognize it, knew something so personal to me that I don't really believe in the supernatural or much folklore, but I often wonder why I heard that whistling that night and who was the one whistling. A part of me believes something along the lines of a ski walker. That area, as I mentioned before, is land in which there are native reservations and a lot of native history and roots. I respect the folklore and it is an interest of mine. So I'm fairly well versed when it comes to the skinwalkers. And a small part often believes that the knowledge I have helped me not call out or interact with the whistling in the woods. It is strange to me that a noise I've only ever heard from one person who I love dearly and am very familiar with came from something that I will never know. I just want to say that if you've watched this far, you should probably subscribe to get notified and stuff. It would really mean a lot. It takes a long time to find these stories and throw these videos together. So, if you could consider it, I'd be grateful. I grew up back in April 2011. My family took a short vacation to Jellystone Park in Laramie, Virginia. We stayed in Skyline Cabin C82, the one that's right beside the nature trail. It was perfect, cozy, quiet, and surrounded by nothing but trees. At the time, I was 11 and my little sister was 8. My parents wanted a simple weekend away, somewhere peaceful that we could hike. But that all changed quickly. Each of us, my mom, sister, and I had something happen that weekend. None of us spoke about it until after we got home because each of us thought we were just imagining things. But it turns out we weren't. The first night, my sister and I were sharing a small bed in the back room. The window was cracked open to let in the cool spring air, and the only sound was the rustle of leaves outside. I remember waking up for no reason, just opening my eyes and feeling watched. When I turned my head, there was a man standing at the side of our bed, tall, broad-shouldered, with his arms crossed tightly over his chest and an angry expression on his face. For a split second, I thought it was my dad. I remember feeling confused, wondering what I'd done wrong, why he was standing there staring at us in the dark. Then my stomach dropped. I could see my coat hanging on the wall through him. The man wasn't solid. He was translucent, like smoke with weight. His face was twisted in what looked like pure resentment. I froze. My sister whispered my name, and I realized she was seeing him too. I panicked and rolled over. Pulling the blanket up to my ears, I didn't look again, but I could feel him standing there watching. I must have fallen asleep eventually. Later that same night, my sister woke me up. She was trembling and whispered my name, but when I didn't respond, she grabbed her little flashlight and pointed it towards the dining table in the next room. She swears she saw the same man sitting at the table hunched forward, his hands clasped like he was deep in thought. She turned the flashlight directly to him and he vanished. The next morning, my mom looked exhausted. She asked if we'd been up walking around during the night, and both of us said no. And she gave us an odd look like she was debating whether to say something. She didn't tell us what she saw until after we got home. That night, while we were both asleep, my mom said she woke up to a bright white orb floating outside the window. It hovered for a second before drifting through the glass like it wasn't even solid and then crossed the cabin towards the door. As soon as it disappeared through the door, she heard a man's voice yell, "You don't belong here." It was like shouting from deep within the walls. We cut the trip short the next morning. My parents claimed it was because of the weather, but I know now that wasn't the reason. Years later, we finally spoke about it, really talked about it.
Ande very detail macet.
The angry man, the translucent figure, the orb, the voice. We even checked photos online recently, and the cabin is still there. See 82 right by the nature trail, and it looks exactly the same. I've always wondered if anyone else who stayed there has experienced something similar. If you've ever spent the night at Jellystone Park in Luray, VA, and something didn't feel quite right, please tell me I'm not crazy. Because sometimes I still see that man in my dreams.